Most people today imagine medieval Europe as a place swallowed by ignorance, filth, and helplessness. A world where disease ran wild through villages and cities alike. Where suffering was simply accepted as part of life because no one supposedly knew how to fight it. It is a very popular image, repeated in documentaries, movies, and classrooms. But this image, as convincing as it may seem, is not just inaccurate. It is almost completely inverted from reality. Because if you were sick in the Middle Ages, if fever burned through your body, if infection spread through a wound, if exhaustion made you collapse on a lonely road, there was only one place you desperately hoped to reach before your strength gave out. Not a castle, not a market, not a university. You hoped to see, rising on the horizon, the stone walls of a monastery. Behind those walls, you would find something that most people today would never expect to exist in the medieval world. Organized care. Beds prepared for the weak. Clean water stored with intention. Herbal medicines carefully cultivated. Warm food for strangers. Bandages ready to be changed. And men and women dressed in simple habits who had taken lifelong vows not to earn money, not to gain prestige, not to advance science, but to care for the sick, because they believed that the suffering body before them was Christ himself. To understand how religious orders became the nurses of an entire continent, we need to go back to a simple sentence written in the Rule of Saint Benedict. A rule that would quietly shape the daily life of thousands of monasteries for centuries. In that rule, Benedict wrote, "Before all things and above all things, care must be taken of the sick. Before prayer, before manual labor, before study, the sick came first." That single instruction transformed monasteries into something far greater than places of prayer. It turned them into the safest spaces in medieval Europe. In a time when cities had no sanitation systems, when plagues could wipe out entire regions, when childbirth was dangerous, when even a small cut could become fatal, monasteries stood as islands of order in a chaotic medical landscape. This was not because monks had advanced scientific knowledge. It was because they lived by discipline, routine, cleanliness, observation, and structured care. They washed regularly. They ventilated rooms. They separated the ill from the healthy. They prepared food with care. They cultivated gardens full of medicinal herbs. They preserved and studied ancient medical texts from Greece and Rome. Without realizing it, they were practicing the foundations of nursing centuries before the word even existed. As roads filled with pilgrims, merchants, the poor, and the abandoned, many of them collapsing from exhaustion and disease, monasteries became known as the only places where anyone would be received without question. Hospitality was not optional for monks. It was sacred. And so monasteries began building specific rooms for the sick, then entire buildings, then entire complexes dedicated to care. These places were called hospitium, a word that would later evolve into what we now call the hospital. Inside these hospitiums, monks and nuns did something no other group in medieval society was doing in a systematic way. They cleaned wounds. They changed dressings. They fed those who were too weak to feed themselves. They comforted the dying. They stayed awake through the night beside beds. They observed symptoms. They experimented with remedies. They learned from experience and passed that knowledge forward. This was not occasional charity. This was organized, institutional, daily health care. Then came the Crusades, and the scale of suffering increased dramatically. Thousands of wounded men needed care far from home, in unfamiliar lands. And once again, It was religious orders that stepped forward. The Knights Hospitaller, the Order of St. John, and later the Teutonic Knights became something very unusual in history. Warrior monks who were also trained caregivers. They built field hospitals, organized wards, separated patients according to their conditions, maintained hygiene standards, recorded treatments. In many ways, they were operating medieval military hospitals. At the same time, across Europe, a quieter but equally important work was being done by women. In convents, female religious orders such as the Sisters of Charity and the Beguines specialized almost entirely in caring for the sick. They became experts in long-term patient care. They stayed day after day, night after night, watching, learning, and tending to the needs of the weak, with patience and consistency that medieval society desperately needed. By the time universities began teaching medicine in a formal academic way, religious orders had already been practicing applied health care for centuries. Doctors could diagnose illnesses, but monks and nuns were the ones who nursed patients back to health. Without them, medicine had no practical structure in which to function. This is something modern history rarely states clearly. The hospital was not born from science. Science entered a structure that the Church had already built. During the Black Death, when entire cities fled in panic and fear, many religious orders did the exact opposite. They stayed. They cared for the infected, fully aware that doing so would likely cost them their lives. And many of them died. Because for them, this was not a profession. It was a vow. If you walked into a medieval hospital run by religious orders, you would not find chaos. You would find order. Silence. Beds aligned with intention. Herbs drying along the walls. Basins of water prepared for washing. Bandages neatly arranged. Someone reading psalms beside a dying patient. Someone feeding soup to a stranger. And no one asking for payment. Centuries later, when modern nursing finally became a recognized profession, Florence Nightingale herself studied the organization of religious hospitals. She did not invent nursing. She modernized a model that monks and nuns had been practicing for nearly 1,000 years. So the next time someone says the Middle Ages were a time of medical darkness, remember this. If you were sick in medieval Europe, the people most likely to save your life were not doctors. They were monks. They were nuns. They were religious orders who transformed compassion into a system and built the first hospitals the world had ever seen. But this raises a question that almost no one asks. If monasteries were centers of healthcare, if religious orders were the nurses of Europe, if hospitals were born from Christian hospitality, then how many other parts of our modern world have medieval monastic roots that we no longer recognize?